Hooligans, and welcome back to another fun Woods Runner Read Aloud. Now today is a special day. Why is today a special day, Miss Shelton? Great question, because today we are reading chapter 16, and this is the first video where I'm not going to be asking questions because there's no questions to answer. So I'm going to be posting chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19, and the in-between sections all at once, so you can binge watch all of them, just like you'd like to binge watch your favorite Netflix show, or like how most of you like to binge watch those awful Minecraft videos on YouTube. Without further ado, we are going to go ahead and read chapter 16. Now, pause. Does this mean, just because you don't have questions, that you don't have to listen to the whole video? Negative, Ghost Rider. Does this mean that just because you don't have questions, you don't have to finish the book? Negative, Ghost Rider, because I can still see who has listened to the whole video and who has not. And that is how you can make sure that you can get your full credit, is to make sure that you listen to all of the videos and make sure that you listen to them from the very beginning to the very end, which is what I've been saying this whole time. Moving right along. Okay, so chapter 16. There was a long, shallow hill as they came into what Samuel would have called a city, and Abner stopped the mules at the top of it, still half a mile out, and studied it. Samuel had never even imagined such a place. Houses and other buildings everywhere, built on the land next to the open water. And that water was another thing he'd never seen. Is that it? He asked. That water, is that part of the ocean? That's the Hudson River, Abner sighed. The Hudson River's in New York, by the way. As they moved from settlement to settlement, each one bigger than the last, Samuel and Annie had been asking, "Is this New York? Is this New York?" "And that's not New York either," Abner said. "Not yet. We're in New Jersey. Look, there across the river through the fog, that's New York. We'll leave the wagon here and the mules and get a boat to get across. I know somebody who might be able to help us." Down below, on mud flats that led out to the river, Samuel saw dozens of boats pulled up to the shoreline, some large, some small, and men waiting to row them across the river. Now and then, through the mist, he could make out what seemed to be a large city. Large? That's not big enough. Huge. "Wait here," Abner said. I'm going to go look for a friend." Between the wagon and the river, there were many buildings, some with fenced-in pens full of oxen and horses and mules. Now, real quick, the New York that we're thinking about today is not what New York looked like back in these times, in like 1776. So we've got to be sure that we are not putting, like, all those big, tall buildings. Those weren't there back then, because obviously this is a long, long, long time ago during the American Revolution. So it looked a lot different than what we're thinking of as New York today. It says between the wagon and rivers were many buildings, some with fenced-in pens full of oxen and horses and mules. Abner came back. Very well. With him was a man who looked a lot like him, gray hair everywhere, tobacco spit down his chin, old clothes. "Matthew here is going to take us across and bring us back. We've had an enterprise with each other before, and he understands the nature of our business. I told him we hope it won't take long and that we prefer coming back in the dark, if possible, and fast. We'll leave the wagon and the mules and the dogs with his boys on this side. They'll keep them ready for us. Samuel, you may take your knife, but you have to leave your rifle here. There are soldiers everywhere, and a rifle will draw attention. Annie, you wait here with the wagon." "No!" "Yes," said Abner. "He's all I've got," said Annie, "and he will be back. If this works, right there will be 2 more people coming back with us, and the boat is not that big. We might need the room." She looked at Samuel. "You come back to me." "I will. I'm telling you, you better or else." Samuel could see that she was crying, and he found himself choking up a bit, but he hid it. "Don't worry." He put his hand on her shoulder. The truth is, he had no idea about anything. They didn't even know for certain if his parents were over there. He looked across the river. It was late afternoon, and the sun was burning the fog off. The city was huge, with buildings standing 3 and 4 stories high, and the houses spread out in a grid. How could they hope to find anybody in all of these buildings? Looking at the city, imagining how many people must be there, made the rest of the trip seem almost easy. The woods, the forest, was nothing compared to this. "Away," Matthew croaked. "We must go. Darkness comes fast on the river, and we must be across when there is still light for us to see. Follow." Abner moved with him toward the boats, and after a moment's hesitation, Samuel followed. There were about 100 boats pulled up along the mud bank in a long line, tied to brush or small trees, and most of them looked to be on their last legs, water-soaked, unpainted clunkers, covered with mud and filth that came down the river. Samuel was surprised, considering that Matthew looked even rougher than Abner, to find that he brought them to a beautifully maintained, painted, double-ended boat about 20 feet long. There was a small cabin in the center, and a short mast over the cabin. So this isn't a cabin like a house. It means like a cabin, like a place for you to sit in a boat. The cabin itself could only take 2 people. Matthew said, "Get inside. What isn't seen isn't noted." He grunted as he heaved the boat out of the mud and into the slow current. Then he jumped in, pulled up the sail, and the canvas surprisingly clean and well tended. He stood to the tiller. There were no seats or benches except in the cabin, but a wooden bailing bucket was in the stern. As soon as the boat was moving in the soft breeze, Matthew pulled the bucket over and sat, put a chew of tobacco in the corner of his cheek, smiled through discolored teeth at Samuel, and said, "Your ma and pa know that you're coming to get 'em?" Samuel looked sharply at Abner. He must have told Matthew the whole story. Abner smiled. "We've done a mite of business together. I told him what we were doing. You can trust him with your life," which, he snorted, is exactly what you're doing at this point. Abner has a whole network, Samuel thought, to work against the British. People on farms, pigeons, and now this man with a boat? Abner was the most amazing man that Samuel had ever met. "No," Samuel said, "they probably think I'm dead, killed by the Indians." Matthew nodded. "A fair surprise for them, then. It's good to have surprises for your family." And he tended to the sailing boat and didn't say another word the whole way across the river. It was just as well, because with the lack of anything productive to think about, Samuel didn't know where they were going, wasn't sure what he would find, and didn't know what he would do if he found or didn't find his parents. His mind was taken up by the sailing. The boat must have been fairly heavy, yet it skimmed along over the water like a leaf. It wasn't so terribly fast, maybe 3 or 4 miles an hour, but it seemed graceful in some way. No, that wasn't it. Free. The wind moved them along quietly, and nobody worked to make it so. It just happened. The boat nudged into the bank. "Out," Matthew said, "and up the bank. The road into town is on the left, sugar mill down to the right in a 1/4 mile. I'll come back every night at midnight and wait until 3 in the morning for 4 nights. If you're not here by then, I'll figure the worst," which means he'll assume that they've died. "What do you want done with the girl if you guys get got? Can you take her?" Abner paused. "Into your family?" Matthew hesitated. "Well," he said, "Emily always wanted a daughter. So be it. We'll bet against it, though. Hopefully you're coming back." And he pushed the boat back out into the current and was gone. Abner said, "Let's get to it," and then he moved up the bank with Samuel following. At the top, Samuel stopped dead. There were people everywhere, all along the road into the city and down the side road that led to the sugar mill, maybe hundreds of them, and it seemed that almost every man was wearing a red coat. Soldiers were wherever you looked, armed and walking into the next buildings, roughly forcing civilians to move out into the street. "Let's start down toward the mill," Abner said. "There might be somebody we can talk to. Get a mite of information." They hadn't gone 20 yards when two soldiers, rifles fixed with bayonets, stopped them. "State your business," said one of them. "I'm on the Crown's business," Abner answered, "from across the river, looking to bring food to the prisoners. I was told they're in the sugar mill. Is that so?" One of the soldiers laughed. "Ay," said one. "There and in the warehouses and churches. But don't waste food on the rebels. You might as well feed it to the hogs, for all the good it'll do. They're all marked for the box." They went off laughing, and Abner started walking again, headed for the sugar mill, Samuel following. What had the soldiers meant by marked for the box? He was so engrossed in his thought and keeping up with Abner, who could walk surprisingly fast, that he almost ran full on into his mother. His mother! Right in front of him. It's a thing that could not happen. Impossible. For the first moment, neither of them believed it. She was dumping out a bucket of slops in the gutter as she as he was dashing down the street after Abner. She glanced up at him and then back at the pail, just as he dodged out of her way, hurrying up to keep with Abner. In that instant, though, their heads jerked back to face each other, and they stood stunned. The world stopped around them. Samuel? She dropped the bucket to the ground, reaching out her hand, cracked, red, and worn, to gently tuck his cheek. We thought you were, after the attack, is it really you? Samuel couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. And then they were holding each other, both crying, until Abner said, "Leave off! You have to leave off! People are watching! Back away!" They moved away from each other. She was very thin and drawn and looked so small. Samuel thought, "Father, is he?" Down the road in that big building, an old sugar mill full of men, prisoners. "I work in this house," she said, pointing. "Cleaning. I get a corner to sleep in and leftover and scrap food, which I take to your father each night. I'm a prisoner too, but this family treats me fairly." She stopped. What happened to your head?" "It's nothing. It's scarred." "Tell us about the prisoners," Abner cut in. "Everything you know." She looked at Abner, then at Samuel. "He's helping me, Mom." Samuel said, "Tell him everything." "Helping you what?" "We don't have time now, Mother. Tell him what he asks." Samuel worried they'd be caught talking and she'd have to go. "Please tell him, Mom." "The prisoners are barely fed. Your father can hardly stand or walk." "Guards," Abner said. "How many guards?" "There are guards inside with the prisoners. At the door, 2. But one sleeps almost all the time. The other one is by the main door. The back door is nailed and boarded shut, and there's only one way in and out. If there was a fire, can you get a private message to your husband, today or early tonight?" She nodded. "When I bring the food, the guard goes through and takes anything good. It's such a small amount, you'd think he'd just let it be, but I will find a way to hide a message. Tell him to be at the front door at midnight, at the middle of the night if he hasn't a watch. Tell him to be there hiding close by the guard, alone, just him, understand?" "Yes," Mom said. "Can you slip out at midnight?" Abner was abrupt. "Right here, at midnight?" "I will, but there are a lot of drunken soldiers on the streets at night, but yes." "All right, do that, and tell your husband to get by the door at midnight alone, and you be out here at midnight or just a few minutes after." She nodded, looking from Abner to Samuel. "We'll come for you then, if everything works right. Now say your goodbyes and get back in the house before we get discovered." "Samuel," she said, turning toward him, "you're sure you're all right?" Everything will be right after tonight, Mother. Please be careful. I thought you were dead, and I just got you back. I can't lose you again." "Go inside," he whispered. He almost smiled, telling him to be careful now after all that had happened. That horse was, truly gone from the barn. "We'll be back later." They looked at each other. She smiled, her lips trembling, staring at him as if to memorize his face. Then at last she picked up the slop bucket and went back into the house. I told y'all it was going to get good. So, I am super excited to read the next chapter, so I'm going to cut this one short. Stay tuned for the next chapters to come, and I love you, and go change the world.